Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Daniel Bangert, National Open Research Coordinator based at the Digital Repository of Ireland at the Royal Irish Academy. And it's my pleasure today to welcome you to this workshop on open access and the humanities, a dialogue on future directions for Ireland. Thank you all very much for joining this morning. This event is a collaboration between Ireland's National Open Research Forum, NORF, and the Irish Humanities Alliance, and is targeted at researchers in the arts, humanities, and social sciences. If you'd like to tweet about the event, please use the event hashtag OpenAccessIE, and feel free to also tag the NORF and IHA Twitter accounts, which are shown on screen. As some of you may not be familiar with NORF, I'll say a few words about the forum and the background to this event. NORF was established in 2017 to drive the national agenda for open research, and in its first phase of work, it developed Ireland's national framework on the transition to an open research environment, launched in mid-2019 and aligned with international policies and practices, particularly as set out by the European Commission's recommendation on access to and preservation of scientific information. The national framework consists of 28 objectives across 5 strategic areas: open access to research publications, which is the focus of today's discussion, but also enabling fair research data, infrastructures for the access to and preservation of research, skills and competencies, and incentives and rewards. NORF's current phase of work is focused on developing and delivering a national action plan that will define nationally coordinated actions for research and researchers in those 5 areas. As further background, earlier this year, NORF developed and circulated for public consultation a landscape report that aimed to capture progress made and challenges in relation to these objectives. We received a broad range of feedback, including from the arts, humanities, and social sciences community. This included the Irish Humanities Alliance position paper on open access, which outlines feedback and concerns broader in scope than what is covered in the landscape report. As a further action, therefore, we felt it vital to facilitate a conversation with and between the community, and today's workshop is an opportunity to feed into NORF's ongoing work, and we're particularly keen to elicit and discuss suggestions for strengthening and supporting open access routes in these disciplines, so that nationally we foster a transition to open research that is as inclusive as possible. Today's discussion, as well as other targeted consultations, for example, with Irish academic publishers, will feed into a policy brief that NORF is developing on supporting diverse publishing practices or bibliodiversity in the Irish landscape. So just to recap, the objectives for today are to facilitate a conversation on impacts and support, and to elicit and discuss suggestions for strengthening and supporting open access routes. And to that end, we're delighted to have in this first half an expert panel joining us to discuss their experiences and perspectives. From publishing open access, being involved in policy development, and in founding and supporting initiatives that are specifically geared to the disciplinary needs of research methods and outputs in the arts, humanities, and social sciences. I'll now hand over to Professor Chris Williams to chair the opening panel. Chris is Professor of History and Head of the College of Arts, Celtic Studies and Social Sciences at UCC, and is also incoming Chair of the IHA for 2021 to 22. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much indeed, Daniel, and welcome everybody. It's a great privilege to be involved with this event, and I'd like to communicate thanks on behalf of the IHA to Daniel and also to the director of the IHA, Mel Farrell, for all the work that's been done in putting this event on. I'm going to keep my comments very, very brief at the beginning, just to introduce our 3 speakers and to explain that if you have questions, please pop them in the chat, and we'll have an opportunity at the end of the 3 presentations to handle some of those questions. So in reverse order, our 3rd speaker is Pierre Mounier, who is the Deputy Director of OpenEdition and the coordinator of Opera, which is the EU infrastructure for open scholarly communication in the social sciences and humanities. And Pierre will be speaking third. He'll be preceded by Dr. Gabi Lombardo, who is director of EASSH, the European Alliance for Social Sciences and Humanities. And our first speaker this morning is Professor Martin Paul-Eve, who is Professor of Literature, Technology and Publishing at Birkbeck at the University of London. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Martin.
Thank you very much, Chris and Daniel and everybody for the organisational efforts that have gone into today. It's great to be here and to be able to talk to you on this topic. I'm going to start just by giving a brief outline of why I've been asked to talk to you today. So I'm an academic in the English Literature Department at the University of London, and I've published 10 books to date. Well, I've written 10 books, most of them are published. So in any case, what I'm trying to point out is that I have a large number of open access publications. So I have experience as an academic from that angle of publishing openly. I also, though, founded an initiative called the Open Library of Humanities that pioneered a new economic model for open access in the humanities disciplines. I've been involved in the UK in the policy around open access, giving evidence to the House of Commons on that topic. I also work on the COPIM project that I'm going to talk about later, which is about open access and books and putting the infrastructure in place to support that. So I guess what I'd like to say is that I'm here talking not only as an academic, but also as a publisher and also as a policy advisor. So I've got a number of perspectives on this issue. And I thought it was probably worth, as I was the first speaker, just going back to some basics about why we're having this conversation, what open access is, what it means, and why it might be of any interest to the humanities disciplines. So open access, just to recap, means the lowering of barriers to accessing scholarship, both in terms of getting rid of paywalls, but also in terms of having open licensing on works to allow downstream reuse. So the basic gist of what we're talking about here is getting rid of paywalls to academic research. And why might we want to do that? Well, as I see it, the natural sciences are breaking away far ahead of our disciplines at the moment in this space. And very soon we're going to reach a world where every piece of natural scientific research is available for anybody to read on the internet free of charge. On the other hand, in our disciplines, the humanities subjects, we have not made commensurate progress. And we're going to hit a situation soon where, by comparison to the sciences, if you want to read humanistic scholarship, you're going to have to pay. So that dichotomy, to me, speaks of a world that would be incredibly dangerous for our disciplines and our defense of them in the public eye. I note also that significant portions of the general public now have humanities degrees and might be interested in the work that we're publishing. But you could also look within university walls themselves and note that access to scholarship is currently very unevenly distributed between institutions. So we even have problems with accessing scholarship in the academy, getting access to journals, still using interlibrary loans, even in this highly digital age. So from my perspective, there are a number of very good and compelling reasons for why open access would be a good idea in the humanities disciplines. This has been recognised in the UK context in a number of recent OA policy announcements that I think have relevance to the Irish context and that, that can resonate with what's happening across the sea. Recent speeches from our Minister for Research, Amanda Soloway, noted that the government intends to push further with its open access mandates, and a review of the UK research and innovation policy in recent months concluded that there's going to be a zero embargo green open access requirement for their funded research, and that they are going to extend open access to monographs from 2024. Just to remind people on these color terminologies, green open access refers to the conditions when you deposit your work in an institutional subject repository, whereas gold open access means that the material is made openly accessible at the source, say by the journal publisher or the book publisher themselves. The next thing on the horizon for us in the UK is the REF review, which is set to take place within the next 6 months. We don't know what that will look like yet, and nothing is set in stone, mostly because we don't know what the next ref looks like here in the UK. It's unclear what funding also would be provided under such a scheme to make open access monographs accessible. And I should point out, we published a study a couple of years ago modelling what it would take to get the UK's ref outputs to be openly accessible, what kind of funding you'd need. And I've got a citation for that on this slide if you want to have a look at that. And that brings me to my slightly more negative slide, which is to think through some of the challenges in getting to open access. I think that on an ideological level, it's relatively easy to convince people that it could be a good idea to do open access for many types of our publications. But there are huge challenges in getting this to work in the humanities disciplines in particular, not least because our funding structures are so very different to the natural sciences. So one of the first points to make is that article and book processing charges, which are the most notorious and well-known funding mechanisms for open access, do not scale well in our disciplinary contexts. So book processing charges, which can often be up to £11,000 for a single book, are just not readily accessible to humanities scholars. This system worked relatively well when we had 200 libraries around the world, each paying £60 to buy a copy of a book. But when you put that cost on a single point in the system and say the author must pay all of the costs required to a publisher in one lump sum of £11,000 or so, that's when you hit a real problem with scaling this funding mechanism. So we need new systems for funding open access if we're really going to see this take off in our disciplines. I think we also all know that open licensing has been contentious, particularly say with art historians who have to reuse works that are in copyright as part of their evidence in their writing practices. I think we also accept that we're just going to have to be more flexible around that if we want to achieve open access in these disciplines. It's not going to be easy just to apply the blanket principle that the most liberal licenses will work in every disciplinary space. I know also we have concerns from learned societies about their revenue streams. Often journal publishing has proved a route by which learned societies can sustain their interdisciplinary activities. By contrast, libraries retort back asking why it should be that their budgets should support those interdisciplinary activities. So there's quite a debate going on around the role of our publishing ecology in supporting the ecosystem that supports learned society activities. We also need to think about different types of books. So trade crossover books, often prevalent in, say, the discipline of history, have a different type of audience and a different type of outreach mode that they're trying to achieve. Geoffrey Crossick's report on open access and monographs indicated that, again, we would have to be flexible around this and consider the output type when we think about open access and not just go in with our everything looks like a nail because we have a hammer as a tool approach. Creative writing, likewise, a discipline where sales of the book have been the conventional measure among the general public of success and reach. We don't know what open access might do to that, and so some care must be taken there. I should also say there are some persistent misunderstandings that we really should work to counter because they don't help us have a serious discussion around this. Open access does not mean abolishing peer review for our publications. It doesn't mean that open access venues cannot be prestigious or even very selective in their peer review processes. And not all open access is gold open access with an article or book processing charge. There are models of green open access that have zero embargo, such as that at Cambridge University Press at the moment, but that are achieving most of what these mandates wish to put through. So I think it's good if we can move beyond those understandings onto, I think, some of the more substantive issues that I've got on this slide. And I just wanted to close up by saying that I've listed some of those challenges, but there are projects underway that are attempting to address some of these problems and to find ways through that work within our disciplinary spaces. And we're going to talk about the ones I'm involved in here. I hope that Pierre will talk about his platforms and efforts later, because I know he's been massively involved in various initiatives over the past few years. The Open Library of Humanities that I founded is the size of a small university press. We publish 28 journals. We do not charge our authors to publish, though. Instead, we have a library membership scheme that's supported by 300 universities worldwide, who pay us an annual fee so that we can publish work without asking authors ever to pay. All of those journals are peer reviewed across a variety of disciplinary spaces, and we haven't hit many of those problems that I gestured towards because we've worked on an alternative economic model. Likewise, Liverpool University Press and the Central European University Press are involved in an initiative called Opening the Future that I'm also running, which is trying to put together a similar model for open access books. The idea being that if they can solicit membership fees from enough libraries worldwide, that will sustain the press's operations, and it can afford to publish books openly without, again, needing authors to find those elusive book processing charges. And last but not least, the COPIN project, which is funded by Research England and Arcadia, is working to build some of the infrastructural components that are missing in the open access books environment. That includes the economic model I just spoke of, Opening the Future, but it also includes digital preservation systems, metadata and discovery systems, and many other technical elements. So that's hopefully my 10 minutes. I've stuck to time. It was a bit of a roller coaster through that. I'm really looking forward to hearing from the other panelists and then going into our breakout groups. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Martin. That's excellent, really informative and concise and helpful. And some of the links to the initiatives that Martin mentioned are in the chat, as well as the reference to the article there on open access mandate for monographs. So we'll now pass on to Gabi Lombardo. Over to you, Gabi.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. And this is a panel of experts, I'm the odd one out. As you know, I represent an umbrella organization of university and disciplinary association in social science humanities, which now actually reach over 65 members, which makes this alliance the largest in Europe. And I only bring to the table what maybe a simplistic view of how people see the whole debate of open access and coalition-S and all the other well-known wording around open science and so on. Okay, well, if we can, I don't know if someone can show my presentation, otherwise I can share the screen.
We're on to your second slide, I think, Gabi.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, as I said, the debate around the Plan-S and open sciences has been very much perceived from the research community. I'm not talking about social science humanities necessarily, but the whole research community. And a latest article came out only a couple of months ago on Nature about a group of researchers expressing their concern around all the kind of heavy hands on how open access should be implemented, how coalition-S is disseminating their narrative. And in addition, also several parties, including, for example, I was talking recently with Science Europe management, the involvement of the research community has been marginal, to say the least. So it seems that the voice of the researchers, especially those most concerned, has been kind of sometimes sidetracked. So I just wanted simply to bring to the table those questions, but also give a slightly different perspective. Also, the publisher have been taking a backseat position, but they did it for other reasons, and my focus is not them, but I've been talking with quite few of them on this issue. Next, please. So publishing remained, in high-quality journals remained obviously important for researchers. And journals remain in the core function, research-driven enterprises. We all know that, okay? So it's not, that's a problem. But it has been mentioned also in the Humanities Alliance's recent paper, the one was published in May 2021 and mentioned by Martin earlier. There are some questions that the researchers are still asking, and here on the slides I only bring a few of them. For example, the fact that the focus of open access has been very much public research, but we know very well that the public research remains a very small part, or a small part of the research that our scholars do and publish. I worked for years at the London School of Economics, a research-intensive university in UK, and I have to say, less than half people were externally funded with public funding. And so the publications are quite a lot of the money come from different type of sources. So this concept of public funded research is still very unclear, and it still maintain a double system altogether. But the other thing is the fact that Europe is very, very committed to it, whereas in US, there's hardly any mention. I was recently on a EASSH conference. Every time I mention what about open access, the people just simply change the subject. So I mean, it's actually quite interesting to see how this is not an homogeneous approach, and scholars are worried that the two largest markets for publication, US, Canada, and Asia, don't even mention it, don't even talk about it. And there's been other questions, for example, one of the others about inequalities, researchers' affordability versus users' affordability, reproduce anyway examples of inequality and so on. I also arguments that, as Martin mentioned earlier, could be also misunderstanding rather than real concern if they were understood in their whole entirety. But I think it's fair to give a voice to them. In spite of all of that, and next please, definitely the humanities and the social science have been very vocal about supporting open access as a principle. They are fully aware the open access research publications are better consulted, better viewed, read the most. And in the recent conference, on the European Humanities Conference in May 2021, the one organized by UNESCO and SIPS, they concluded the conference with a Lisbon Declaration. And the Lisbon Declaration, as you can see from the slide, definitely invite and encourages scholars to work with open access and to work under open science principles. So scholars are not against it, and scholars are not, as we heard earlier, they just wanted to be part of the discussions. And I think that's very important. And as Martin mentioned earlier, and I'm glad he did in a much better way than I could have ever done, the scholars are very much in favor of a system, a model, which allowed to have free access for users and free access for authors, the so-called diamond journals. And I'm glad in the panel there's Pierre, because Pierre is the author of another report that I would like to quickly mention. Next, please. Which is the report funded by Science Europe and then published by Coalition S, in which there are really interesting, what I think they are interesting figures about diamond journals. So this kind of journals, they are free for users and free for authors, but kind of funded by third party. And the report found that they exist, globally there exist 29,000 of these journals, which is an interesting number. Only a third get picked up by official indexes. More interesting is that the distribution, the geographical distributions, where almost half of them are in Europe, where we are really, as scholars and as a society, pushing open access seriously, and 45% of these journals are based in Europe, whereas only 5%, for example, in US and Canada, and that's the double market that I was mentioning before. Even more interesting is that 60% of them are in social science and humanities. And again, Martin earlier mentioned that natural science are far ahead in this game of open science and open access. I'm not so sure about it. I don't have the figures with me, so I wouldn't not make a claim. But I'm pretty sure that there's quite a lot of literature in social science humanities research, which has been open and available And actually, for that reason, this open dissemination has been also understood as a fragmentation. I'm a part of the advisory board of ERI+, which is the largest database of publications, social science, humanities. And they really cover a large number of journals, about 10,000. And many of them are not even checked because the engine finding these things is not so easy and it's not so straightforward. But the problem of these diamond journals, the report found, is that they are not yet fully compliant with the standard, the technical requirements of Plan S, which makes this whole venture a little bit more difficult. And they have usually are small ventures, and they do less than 50 articles per year. So the report showed that a move to a fully open access landscape is clearly going to become much easier when there are more journals that can guarantee the same level of quality control and the same level of technical requirement and standard. It's all about infrastructure. I'm sure Pierre will tell us more about it because it is his main point of discussion. Next, please. What I also think is that clearly open science is a lot more than just a discussion around open access. I think academics today, as well as publishers, have realized that in a knowledge society, the value of knowledge is not just for specialized audience. Technical journals were born mainly with a subscription for a circle of people. It was a circulation among peers. This is no longer the case. The specialized publications go well beyond the peers. And there's also a co-creation of research and sharing of data in code, which is much wider than ever been before. We've been talking a lot about science driving policy. Sorry, there's a mistake in the slides. Science driving policy, not the opposite. And the education and civil society using articles constantly. I had a recent conversation with the European civil society organizations been claiming we want access to scientific articles. So we do access to scientific articles on a regular basis. They are core of our work and our existence and our campaigns. And so the value of knowledge is already scattering across society very fast. And we know that there are different types of publication which already coexist. There's a value paywall, not paywall. It makes me think a little bit of what's happened with the revolution of the cinema industry. Well, before you had to go to the cinema to watch a film. And then all of a sudden, we have a very, very short period of time. We went through videos and CDs and Netflix and access to all these property right protected films available on your phone, on your screens, on all places. All these models will coexist. All these model application will coexist. And I think the subscription model might be already obsolete. I pass the baton to Pierre to talk more about infrastructure, which I think actually is a much more crucial discussions on this issue. Next, and this is just a thank you, my last slide. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Gabi, and we'll go straight over to Pierre.
Thank you very much, Chris. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, do you see it full screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So thank you again for the invitation. I'm really delighted to be with you today and to have the opportunity to discuss with you indeed the question of the role of the infrastructures to support the development of open access and open science policies. So as a starting point, I think it's good to take as a starting point the recently published position paper published by the Irish Humanities Alliance regarding open access and the humanities. And I was really interested to note that in the summary of the position paper, the point number 3 insists and highlights the very important role of the infrastructure to support the development of open access, and also the need to provide appropriate funding to support this infrastructure. So we have a meeting point there, and I'd like to take some minutes to discuss with you what is the role, and more particularly, what are the challenges regarding these infrastructures to support open access. I just want to remind everyone that, in fact, the question of the role of infrastructure to support scholarly communication is not new, and it was not born with the open access question, because, in fact, when we think about it, the libraries themselves, they are infrastructure, and they have always been infrastructures to support access to knowledge for the scholars themselves, for the students, and for the society. And it's really not new with the open access topic, the role of those libraries as an infrastructure to support scholarly communication. And it's the same with the university presses, which have been founded a long time ago, and have been developed across decades and the different ages of scholarly communication. So we could consider also that university presses, not only one university press, but let's say the network of university presses, can be considered as an infrastructure to support the dissemination of knowledge. And I just want to also let's say share with you an information about the fact that some university press, so I have an example in France, where the university press of the Maison des Sciences de l'Homme, which is one of the publishers with whom I published some of my books, they also invested into more infrastructural services, such as, for example, a distribution infrastructure for the books they publish and that other university press publish. So dissemination and distribution has already been a long time ago also a topic where the scholarly community invested to be sure that the knowledge that was produced was correctly distributed and disseminated and then accessible. Of course, with the digital turn, let's say, of scholarly communication, there was the creation and the development of a lot of digital infrastructures to support not only the digital dissemination of knowledge, but also the open access dissemination of knowledge and the open access to knowledge. And that's what's really interesting, is to see the differentiation of the types of infrastructures that are already now in the landscape. So you have, for example, hosting and dissemination platforms such as OpenEdition that you know, and in France, for example, we have OpenEdition, which is some sort of a similar platform than OpenEdition. But you have also other infrastructures such as directories, such as the Directory of Open Access Books and the DOAJ for the open access journals, which are also different kinds of infrastructures providing services to support access to knowledge, because they enable, for example, the discovery of publications. We have also infrastructures that develop editing and publishing tools, such as the PKP, the Public Knowledge Project in Canada, developing the Open Journal System and the Open Monograph Press. And America, for example, in Latin America, is really interesting because this is an infrastructure that develops at the same time directories, platforms, tools, and know-how, and share the know-how and the skills amongst the different supporting staff in the universities of Latin America to provide efficient open access services. So now I'd like to focus a little bit on what I consider as the three main challenges that have to be addressed regarding these infrastructures. The first challenge is quite obvious, is the question of the sustainability. because those new types of infrastructures, they have to be sustained in the long term. And we all know that most of them, they really struggle to find structural funding or long-term funding to support the continuous service provision that they are supposed to provide. This has to be this has been highlighted really in an efficient way in a report that was published some years ago, Putting Down Roots by Knowledge Exchange, which highlighted really the importance of ensuring sustainability for those infrastructures, which are the key players on top of which everything can be made possible. And if the infrastructure collapse, then there is no, let's say, coherent open access practices and policies possible. And of course, there was the development of the SCOS funding program to help secure funding for the vital infrastructure in which open science depends. That was a first, let's say, answer to this kind of challenge. The second challenge regarding the infrastructure supporting open access and open science is the question of open nets. So why do I say that? Because it's not enough that the infrastructure supports open access. It's necessary that the infrastructure itself is open. So the infrastructure has to be open by itself also, meaning that it has to be open to the diversity of the players. It can't be a private club. It has to be designed in a way and governed in a way that it supports the large diversity of stakeholders, users, and players in the landscape. And I think that Martin presentation and Gabi presentation insisted on that. And I've heard also from Daniel in the introduction the word bibliodiversity. So the question of bibliodiversity and how the infrastructure support bibliodiversity is really a key topic and a key challenge. And of course, there was this position paper in fact, which is not a position paper, published by Geoffrey Bilder, Jennifer Lin, and Cameron Nayland last year, trying to list the principles of open scholarly infrastructure that has to be implemented in the design and the governance of the infrastructure themselves. The third challenge that has to be addressed is the question of the fragmentation. And Gabi, you talked about the fragmentation challenge for the infrastructures and in the landscape in general. It's really a good news to see that policymakers, such as the research and higher education ministries of the European countries, gathered into this European Strategy Forum for Research Infrastructure, which is named ESFRI, 3 years ago in the report that they made to elaborate their roadmap for the European investment in research infrastructures. They identified that particularly for the social sciences and humanities, there was a fragmentation challenge between the different players that had to be addressed specifically through coordination to improve the efficiency of the service provision, to improve also the readability by the users, meaning the researchers, of the landscape and the services which are provided to them, and to improve the sustainability of the infrastructure itself, and also to enable the full transition towards open science. Because if we stay at the level of fragmentation and if there is no coordination, then the transition towards open science is really more difficult, if not totally impossible. Okay, so now it's time for me to give you some information about the organization I represent here as an organization that tries to, in fact, at European level, address the 3 challenges that I've listed. So OPRAS is a pan-European initiative of distributed infrastructures that tries to, regarding the scholarly communication in social sciences and humanities in particular, to support the sustainability of the existing infrastructures in the landscape and the different European countries, to adopt openness as a founding principle for the whole community, and of course to address more particularly the fragmentation challenge through coordination service provision amongst the different players. So here on the website of OPRAS, you have a definition and a mission of the infrastructure. So it's the research infrastructure supporting open scholarly communication in the ESSH in the European research area. And our mission is to coordinate and federate resources in Europe to efficiently address the scholarly communication needs of the European researchers in the field of SSH. We are currently 53 organizations coming from different European countries, and we are led by 10 core members gathered in an executive assembly who lead the European effort coming from 10 European countries. And we gather different types of stakeholders, I would say, mainly infrastructures, platforms, publishers, libraries, and universities and research performing organizations which are involved into scholarly communication activities and service provision for the SSH. How do we work? We work mainly through special interest groups. So our community of the 60-something member organizations, they are gathered and they work collectively in special interest groups, which are dedicated to specific topics. You see the list on the left, and the special interest groups, what they do mainly is to publish white papers, trying to establish the state of art of the topics they address, and trying to also foresee the future developments, identifying the gaps, and foreseeing the future developments which are needed by the community. We develop also a catalog of services that can be useful for the European researchers and society. So we have currently five services under development to provide discovery of open access materials in SSH, to certificate the peer review of open access books, for example, to provide metrics also, and to provide a portal giving access for the researchers to publication services. And of course, we fund and we support all these activities through different projects, mainly European Commission funded projects, but not only. And Gabi, thank you very much for having presented the Diamond Journal study that was funded by Science Europe. That's one of our projects. That's one of the projects we were involved in to gain better understanding of these very peculiar landscape of Diamond Journals, not only in SSH. Of course, we are not a private club, not at all. We are open. We are an open infrastructure, which means that everyone is invited to join us and to grow the community and participate to our collaborative work. So you can have also information about how to join OPRAS, what does it mean, what are the commitments linked to that. I just want to tell you that in our scientific advisory committee, we have someone, one of our members, John Howard, who is coming from the University of College of Dublin. Of course, he's not representing the country in the scientific advisory committee, but he's someone coming from Ireland and participating to the discussions in our scientific advisory committee. And my last slide is to just try to propose you an idea, which is to say that the most important thing for me, on top of addressing the different challenges of developing infrastructures to support open science and open access, is to try to move from infrastructures to the infrastructure. Because in the concept itself of infrastructure, there is the idea and the concept of linking things together in a seamless ecosystem and environment to nurture and to support activities. So, you know, physical infrastructures, usually they are represented through pipes and lines and railways and so on, connecting and facilitating the communication within a community or within a society. So all in all, it's not small pieces of infrastructures developing services on their own corner. It's about connecting all those service providers together to provide for the user, in this case, the researcher mainly, a seamless environment and a seamless and a sustainable ecosystem to support their activity. And that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Pierre. And that's really excellent 3 presentations that we've had. We've got a few minutes before we have a break in which we could take a couple of questions that have been popped in the chat. So perhaps what I'll do is just read those 2 questions out, and then I'll invite our speakers to respond if they'd like to. So we have a question from Valeska Lima Manuth, I think. Question to speakers: high APC figures, so article processing charges figures, are not sustainable, and they've generated a huge publishing industry that profits from public funded research. And Valeska draws attention to the Cielo platform, composed of 15 Latin American countries, which provides free access to journals funded by governments and UNESCO. I think that's scientific electronic, I did look it up, electronic library online. And then the second question is from Chair of the IHA, Neve. Are there examples of research career publication case studies that reflect the choice individuals have made within specific disciplines around open access publishing? As well as navigating the OA infrastructure, researchers also have to be responsive to the strategic KPIs of their own institutions and the disciplinary norms of their fields. So examples of how and where people have done this effectively would be very helpful. So I don't know if perhaps Martin would like to pick up those initially, and then we'll invite the other speakers to come in as well.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, thanks for the questions. I did give a brief response to the first point in the chat, but I'll just reiterate some points there. That Cielo really, and the entire ecology of South American academic publishing is really something from which we could learn a great deal. They have a distributed ecosystem. It's not a centralized platform, but they have a distributed system of support, infrastructure sharing, and collaboration that looks a little bit like that Diamond OA study that was gestured towards. It's a set of disaggregated publications who have their own autonomous freedom to do what they like, but they're bound by a set of principles and infrastructural sharing commitments. I think it's quite difficult to see how we get from our publication ecosystem we have, which is dominated by large for-profit publishers like Taylor and Francis, Informa Group, Elsevier in the natural sciences, to something that has that more mission-oriented and even scholar-led approach. But I nonetheless think that we need to take more lessons from this area of the world rather than seeing ourselves as exporters of knowledge to it. There is still this kind of colonial hangover that we don't look abroad for new ways of doing things. We assume that the way we're doing it is fine, whereas actually they have solved a number of these problems and worked around it. And just to speak to the point about career examples, I guess I just gesture back towards my own record of 40 peer-reviewed articles, 7 books published, 2 in press, all of which are open access, and which helped me to land a job and to be appointed as the youngest professor of English in the UK at the time. Now, often that was using green open access. So I'd publish in the venues that I knew my peers respected, that institutional metrics demanded. But I was always on top of what the journal would allow me to do with that. And I have turned down publication opportunities in journals that were too restrictive on the green open access front. But for the most part, it's actually relatively easy to make your journal articles openly accessible under a green mandate with, yes, there may be an embargo sometimes at the moment, but it's a heck of a lot better than not. And everyone can do that from scratch. The book scenario is slightly harder. I managed to achieve that because I got funding that could pay for this. So some of those were funded projects where we had, say, a grant from the Mellon Foundation. I think we had a generous grant from Arcadia on one of our books as well, to the MIT Press. And those made it work. What I hope to see, though, in the next few years are more publishers implementing models that mean we have that more equitable system that Gabi was gesturing towards, where neither authors nor readers are asked to pay. And when that happens, really open access is going to be something that people will want for their work, because the negative disadvantages of economic pressure will be withdrawn. The benefits of increased readership will be clear. and we won't have that iniquitous situation of thinking we've just transferred the inequality from readers to authors. So books are hard at the moment is my answer to that, but there is a world coming where I think it will be easier and it will be less of a risk for early career scholars to want to pursue open access, because it's just something that has been integrated into our landscape in a better way.
Thank you very much, Martin. I don't know if Gabi or Pierre want to contribute anything here. We are a bit pressed for time because I want to give people the chance to have a break before we reassemble. But if you have something you'd like to chip in with, please. Yeah, Pierre.
Yeah, just to follow up on this question with Cielo, it's interesting because we should keep in mind that Cielo is not an exception, because there are many Cielos everywhere. In fact, when you look at the landscape at a worldwide level, so there is Cielo in Brazil and Latin America. I've also made reference to Redalic America initiative in Latin America, which is different from Cielo, but provide quite the same type of services. In France, you have OpenEdition, which is a nationally funded platform providing hosting and dissemination for diamond journals in SSH. In Croatia, for example, you have Artshak, which is a platform hosting 500 Croatian diamond journals in all disciplines. In Japan, you have JStage with several hundred journals. So I could go endlessly through the different countries, and then suddenly our representation of the scholarly communication landscapes changes, because those platforms, they are not the exception. In fact, they are everywhere, but we have to represent to shift our representation of the landscape and acknowledge, and that's what we try to do also with the diamond journal study, that they are very important, if not the most important part of the scholarly communication landscape. And the Gold APC model then appears suddenly to be no more the norm, but a model amongst others.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Gabi, do you want to say anything here?
Just very quickly, there was a question about career, which is something, one of the dichotomy of this whole discussion, and why I think, I mean, all these models will live together. So the ref is asking, they're going to evaluate the only open access articles, so they might not consider the others, so still not confirmed, but that's one of the rumors. But also the Commission has been putting so much pressure on open access. Among the key performance indicators, they got high ranking publications, which makes me laugh. And we, as EASSH, we've been making the point to say, well, you can't advertise with your right hand and then take it from your left hand, because it makes no sense. Some coherence is needed in this whole landscape, and not just for the sake of researchers, but really for the sake of the whole argument. And no matter what we do, and this is the discussion that I've been having with many publishers at the moment, is that the whole this system will live in parallel. And about the impact on career, the impact on our daily life, and the standards of publication, scholarly communications, I'm completely in favor of supporting the infrastructure to publishing on open access, as long as it doesn't become completely disseminated. As Pierre was saying, we really need some coherence how to find these things. And I'm discussing with the publisher to actually do that, start working on the fact that there's TV publication not just for scholars. There's a much bigger audience out there. Start working on making our research findable, that we can actually easily find the research we produce, particularly for social science humanities, is still a very big problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabi. We are going to have to draw it to a close there. I know there's at least another question in the chat, but there will be an opportunity later on in this workshop to come back to some of these questions. Can I just wrap up? We're going to have a short break now before we begin the breakout sessions in about 2 minutes. But can I just wrap up by thanking our three panelists for three excellent and really provocative and thoughtful presentations this morning. Thank you very much indeed.